Emmet Van Driesche, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's good to have you back. It's been a while since you were on Suit Up.
Yeah, it's nice to be back.
We are continuing down the trail. In this case, it's a Western, bitter, dry, desert trail of MacKenna's Gold to talk
Yeah.
about the influences of Indiana Jones leading up to Indiana Jones 5. First and foremost, before we start talking about MacKenna's Gold, what are your thoughts on Indiana Jones 5? Looking forward to it, worried about it?
I'm looking forward to it. I think that Indiana Jones really benefits from the humor of the backstory. And as Indiana ages, I think his backstory becomes more rich. And so I think the ability to say more poignant things becomes greater and greater. At least that's my sense from the first movie to the fourth movie.
Mm-hmm. I recently saw a meme that was something like the most realistic thing in the Indiana Jones world is a professor at 80 that's not retiring.
Yes, I could see that. That's good. I did see that they apparently had a bunch of age jokes
Mm-hmm.
that they took, and they made the very strong move of just letting the situation be funny, and then he plays it straight. So I think that'll be a smart move.
I agree. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. I keep saying it. I believe in James Mangold, so I'm excited to see what they do. Indiana Jones 5, it has all my hopes.
Yeah.
Well, at least some of them. Most of my hopes for movies. Cinema may be dead if it is a terrible movie.
I wonder if Shia LaBeouf will be back because I thought he was an excellent foil for Indiana Jones.
I I think I saw a report that he won't be, but that doesn't mean that he actually won't be. The hard part is that for him is he's become such of a meme
Yeah,
as a
yeah,
character that it
yeah.
would be really hard, I think, for them to do it. Not saying it couldn't be done. I just think
Yeah,
that they'd have to do it well.
right.
It couldn't be just shoehorned. There'd have to be something.
Yeah.
So, MacKenna's Gold, have you ever seen the movie before this time?
No, I've seen my share of old westerns, but I this one was actually quite interesting. It felt like it really straddled. It was 1969, I believe, so it really
1969.
straddled sort of the earlier westerns and the later westerns. There was stuff that felt like the earlier stuff and stuff that felt like the later stuff, and it was kind of an odd mixture, I have to say.
I so I watched the movie, and when I watched the movie, I was like, oh, this is not what I expected, because it does have such a radical it does feel like it's really trying to be in both camps. It's not
Yes.
committing one way or the other, because we have these beautiful John Ford-esque cinema shots.
Yep. Yep. And then you
And
have a Quincy Jones soundtrack with a song about an old buzzard right at the
oh,
very
old turkey buzzard.
end. What is going on here? This is some strange stuff.
Like, this was 69. It feels like it's 75.
Right.
This
Right.
is
Yeah.
everything we're about to get in the 70s that I don't like in movies.
It was a real premonition of that. Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
I
And
figured,
it had so many of the great, I mean, it's such a great thing to watch in relation to Indiana Jones because you can so clearly see the things that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were taking inspiration from in the Indiana Jones movies that I didn't know the precedent for it. So I thought of them as being the originators of this style of movie. But then you see this movie and you're like, whoa, I see. That's where that came from.
which I'd like to point out, I think is one of the perfect things. Because so like this movie has a 20% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It is not well regarded in terms of like the classics of cinema.
Right.
But excellent point is, yeah, Spielberg and Lucas watched this movie and went, huh, those were 3 or 4 things I really liked in it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they decided to take it and do something good with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I'd like to do is kind of walk through the plot of the movie, since I'm guessing most people have not seen MacKenna's Gold.
Sure. Although it's Gregory Peck, right?
It's
Gregory
Gregory
Peck.
Peck.
And
This is
I
the
was
first
having
Gregory Peck movie I've ever seen.
I was having lunch yesterday with my 97-year-old grandmother, and I told her about this movie, And she said, "Who's in it?" And I said, "Gregory Peck," and she said, "Oh."
Okay, so like I didn't know who Gregory Peck was, and like I of course knew the name because he sounds it's a cool
Right,
name. Obviously one
right,
of those like Hollywood stage names.
right.
But having watched the movie now, I'm like, okay, so like I can see this where Robert Mitchum feels like a discount Gregory Peck. I can see why this guy was a star.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And uh, in many ways, he's sort of the most emblematic of the sort of quiet, strong man of the
Mm-hmm.
19th. I mean, even more so than John Wayne, I would say. You know,
Yes. He
he,
reminds me a lot of Gary Cooper, just a different flavor of Gary Cooper.
yeah, and like very non-emotive,
Mm-hmm.
but sort of always there doing the right thing at the right time. And it's easy to see that as a stereotype, but like my grandpa was like that. You know, there's a
Yeah.
reason my grandma likes that. You know, like that was what he was. You know.
That was the time and the era. And
Yeah. Yeah.
you can see it's very emblematic of that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So at the beginning of the film, we're given voiceover, which there's always that question, how much of this was them trying to salvage a movie? Because it's based
Right.
on a book.
Right.
And so I can see where like maybe it was from the beginning, they're like, oh, there's going to be this dramatic voiceover narration. But then there's the voiceover, and then it leads into Old Turkey Buzzard.
Right. And there's no real the voiceover doesn't actually lead any. There's no
It
like
just
sense.
tells you the premise of MacKenna's gold, that they're
Exactly.
going for this old legend.
Yeah. Yes. Although I did some poking around on Wikipedia, and the cool thing is that McKenna's Gold, the movie, is based on the book McKenna's
Mm-hmm.
Gold. McKenna's Gold, the book, is based on uh, a true legend in the sense that it's not somebody didn't just make it up out of thin air. This was an actual legend that somebody based a book off of. You know, the plot revolves around sort of these characters who interact with the legend, but the legend is a
An
real
actual
legend.
thing.
Yeah, which is very cool.
Yeah, I mean it's of course there's that small part of me. It's like, wow, the Indians, and I'm going to say Indians probably multiple times this instead of Native Americans. It's because it's a Western people. It was cowboys and Indians. It was a time and an era. We're going
Yeah,
with the whole movie premise, not the cultural larger narrative here. But it's always Spanish conquistadors, and there
right,
is something with gold.
right.
I love how that is the go-to for any legend of buried treasure in the
I,
Americas.
I also love that the tribe, and I mean, this has more to do perhaps with geology than anything else, but that the tribe was the Apache,
Mm-hmm.
which I was obsessed with Indians as a kid and learned about all the different tribes. And the Apache were a fascinating tribe in the sense that they, of all the tribes, really they were the ones that sort of spurned material wealth above all other tribes. They deliberately chose a life of asceticism essentially, and sort of they were the most Spartan of all the tribes in the sense that they scorned material wealth and comfort and physical comfort and prided themselves on the value of a person was based on what they could endure rather than what they had. And so it is perfect in a way that that's the tribe that this takes place.
See, and that's context I would have rather had in the movie than a song about old turkey buzzard that's flying and watching, because like it doesn't lead anywhere. And this leads to the beginning of the movie where the regretfully named Apache chief Prairie Dog
Yeah.
is basically journeying to the desert to die.
Yes.
And McKenna like is following him but not following him. He's like just out in the desert, and Prairie Dog sees him, tries to shoot him, and like
Not, we think that maybe later on we sort of think that maybe McKenna was hunting down
Colorado.
Colorado and his bandits, but really that was not set up well. Like it was
No.
not.
Okay,
There's
so
so many ways you could set that up better. It was just random.
this gets to, we're gonna get to that point because that's like the first big gripe with this movie. And I'm gonna sound like I'm complaining a bit. It's because I like good storytelling, and I think that this film struggled with the basic elements of it at times, actually many times. And in this, so Prairie Dog tries shooting McKenna. McKenna doesn't get shot, and like he has like a heart attack, falls over, something like that. And basically McKenna's like trying to nurse him to health-ish, and the guy's like, I'm just gonna die. And he knows who McKenna is. McKenna knows who Prairie Dog is, and he finds the map. And he's like, oh. And of course, it's exposition again. Dying Native American is there to give exposition, as all classic movie tropes have. And he's like, you can't get the gold. It's the blah, blah, blah. If you try getting it'll be a chain reaction. Horrible things will happen. And McKenna's like, I don't believe in the gold anymore. And he throws the map on the fire.
Well, and so later on, we discovered that Prairie Dog was going to the Valley of the Gold to die, and that, as per tradition, he should have told someone, a successor, where the valley is. Now, it becomes clear that all the Apache know where the valley is anyway. But there is this hanging thread of, if there's a map, and if none of the Apache who are with Colorado's men actually know where the valley is, like, none of it actually makes any sense.
No, and I think he kind of gives a reason where the Apache have become, this goes back to the point you made earlier that would have been helpful context. The Apache have become too materialistic. They lust for gold. And so he's going to deny them ever finding it, which is undermined by the fact that they find it at the end. But then we get this immediate, like, old chief dies, Prairie Dog dies. And then we cross-cut into this house and Colorado, played by Omar Sharif, and his men are kidnapping a woman. And he says, if you want her, I'll sell her back to you when I come back through, in the best way to show he's a bad guy. But then literally from that scene, it cuts to then Colorado, his bandits and Apaches there by McKenna.
Right.
Like, I feel like that's a scene that should have been at the beginning of the movie. Because obviously, like, the time period is supposed to be, like, longer, because the girl isn't even with them anymore. And, I will
say Omar Sharif, I think, was an excellent choice, though, because he's so charming.
He is. That's the thing that...
character really relies on his charmingness, because if he was just a jerk or a truly evil person, it wouldn't be as nice. But Omar Sharif just plays a charming character. You know, this guy was...
He does. And that's the thing that surprised me, though, a little bit, is that they set up the beginning with him kidnapping a woman and then the insinuation that he rapes her at some point, because you're like, this is at odds.
He's either charming and he didn't mean it, or he's actually more evil than his charming facade lets on. And it's like they start off with the second one, and then they're like, no, he's actually just charming.
The entire time, every time Omar Sharif was on screen, he was delightful.
Yes.
Best highlight of the movie, which works well because you have Gregory Peck, who is emoting nothing the entire movie. And then Omar Sharif is like the 5-year-old that is having to tag along with him. The other thing I thought when I saw Omar Sharif and every scene he was in, I'm like, if they remade this today, Pedro Pascal would be cast in that role.
Oh, yes. That would be amazing. So who would play Gregory Peck's character?
I say this only because there's a meme floating around right now of the two of them from The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, but I would love to see Nick Cage play the... because the two of them in that movie, he's trying to play like the more normal person, and then there's Pedro Pascal, who's just like...
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yep, I could totally see that. For
Hollywood, sure. Call me. I've got ideas.
Seriously. Yeah. And it's such, I mean, the movie, for being such a flop, right? I read that it totally flopped in the US, but it went on to become a hit, or a massive hit in the USSR and in China.
Which makes sense.
How so?
I've just come to the conclusion that things that don't always like speak to American audiences do very well in the East.
Right, and maybe they look at it and they're like, oh, under our society, this makes total sense.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. There's the storytelling structure, I think, is different. Like if I don't know how many Russian films you try watching or films that originate.
Yeah,
they
not only.
There's a definite, from what I have seen, the limited international cinema I've watched, there's a slightly different way that film structure works oftentimes. And you'll notice like there's a difference when they take Hollywood elements and incorporate into their system, and then we take it back and reincorporate it into our system. That's like the whole Hong Kong cinema type thing. But so they meet McKenna as he is digging the grave for Prairie Dog, and they say, hey, dig it a little bit bigger and we'll put your body in with him. And they realize McKenna burned the map. And again, brilliant line of exposition from Colorado, who obviously like knows who McKenna is. McKenna's a marshal. We forgot to mention that because it's virtually meaningless to the plot. And
it really is. That has no meaning. Yeah.
And then McKenna's like, I burned it. You'll never find it. It's not real anyway. And Colorado's like, I know I've gambled with you. You have memorized every card. You memorized that map. And thus they have an explanation for why they don't kill McKenna. And we now have a reason to drag him along. The Indians want to take Prairie Dog's body with them so that they can take him to the valley. And there is a tense moment that they were doing like a Sergei Leone type scenario where it's like this tense moment of the Indians saying, we're taking the body with us. Omar Sharif saying, we're not. And it literally cuts between two eyes and then the sky. And then, okay, literally dissipates.
And that's the thing. He like, you can tell that this is, I think, the brilliance of Omar Sharif's character, which is that he is always willing to go wherever the wind points, and he will do so with a smile. And so it just, that part I felt like was very in keeping with his character. Like Omar Sharif's character is sort of the most consistent throughout the movie.
That is very true.
Yeah.
Which is shocking because we've already pointed out how inconsistent he is at the beginning. But once we get past that, genuinely, like I think that once we get past the
I wonder how much its cultural stuff is like, I felt like this was a movie that was very much sort of out of sync with our modern cultural sense of what is evil, what is not evil, what is too much, what is not too much. And there was a way in which I almost just feel like it was a throwback to, I don't know, some way of looking at kidnapping a woman and selling her back to her father, and then killing the father in front of her. That I almost feel like it's like a World War II level of careless brutality that is jarring to us today, but maybe felt more.
Well, I mean, 69. So we're at the era of cultural unraveling, where we're questioning everything, where the idea of right and wrong is more blurred. We have Dirty Harry as like a iconic hero. So I can see where the film makes sense in its context, that they're playing with this idea of less of a black hat, white hat.
Right. It almost felt like there were two writers and one of them wanted to make a grittier movie than the other. They sort of got different scenes between the two of them, and in the end, it sort of gave you a strange mishmash.
So they take McKenna to their secret base in a box canyon, which is a scene that feels.
And also, then there was the going across the rope bridge.
Yes, that's right, the rope bridge, which is very Temple of Doom.
Yep.
It looks even like the exact same type of bridge, but then again, I guess most old wooden bridges are supposed to look somewhat similar.
Well, this bridge, I mean, this bridge looked to, I don't know if this type of bridge exists in southwestern New Mexico, but this type of bridge is a type of bridge that was classically made in the Andes, and also in northern India. And I've actually seen a cross-section sample made of it in the Smithsonian Museum of Native Americans, where they have like this is the giant rope that's underneath it, and this is and it to me it felt a little jarring because it felt like
It looks out of place.
it felt like some completely different culture that they just put in because they couldn't resist, where they were like, now we're gonna have a rope bridge, it's gonna be awesome.
And that's where I'm curious about the book. Like, is there something like that in the book, and just the version of it they put on screen doesn't look accurate?
They also didn't do anything with it in the sense
No,
that
it wasn't like a plot device. It was just a moment to watch, and you get, okay, this is one of my big bugaboos. I nearly vomited when this scene came up because the camera tilts the screen. Like, it's like someone took Photoshop and turned like you're playing with a mirror.
yeah, there are a bunch of moments in this movie that felt like they had an early GoPro and they were just having fun with it. Where they're like, let's attach it to a horse, and then you get the horses, which some of them were cool, but some of them were a little weird and lame. And it was like an early technology that they hadn't quite figured out. This is a cool way to use it. This is a dumb way to use it. And they were just trying a whole bunch of stuff.
But it
But
does feel like the bridge is a waste because it doesn't. So story is conflict.
In Act One that doesn't actually get used. It
Yes.
doesn't circle around. Nothing happens. It doesn't drive. It doesn't. You don't learn anything about anybody. It's just this moment of like, oh, it's a cool bridge. That's about it. It doesn't break in any way.
It breaks like a moment, and then literally nothing happens though. No one dies. There is no change to the plot. Every scene in a story should advance or at least matter to the plot. I'm going to rant about that probably a few more times in this film, which leads to the next point. We get to then the hideout, which is just a scene for exposition where, okay, we're establishing that he knows where Kaz Gold is. We're introducing more of the bandits that Omar Sharif has, among them being Julie Newmar as an Indian who, for the Batman 1966 fans out there, she played Catwoman for the first season and a half, I think. And she has a scar down her face, and apparently it had something to do with Gregory Peck's character, even though it's unexplained and shadowy.
Way later, but there's no there's this love-hate thing going on between them that is a little weird.
Very weird. So many things. Again, I wonder how much acid the people making this movie were on. It was the 70s. We didn't have cocaine yet. Those were the 80s movies.
Right.
So they're in the Box Canyon. Really, again, very little happens here other than it turns out, oh no, one of Colorado's bandits betrayed him and told other people they were going after the gold, they were going after Prairie Dog. And so now there are more people that join, and Colorado shoots the man that betrayed him because he betrayed him. But they decided there's enough money for everyone. There's enough gold for everyone. We're going to split the pot. You've got preachers. You've got an editor of the local paper. Colorado's like, why did you drag all these people here? He's like, gold is a hard thing to keep a secret.
Yeah.
And they're two Englishmen dressed in safari outfits.
Right. Which is almost the icing on the cake.
Which is like no explanation. And Colorado looks at this group and is asking the same question as us. Why? Why are these people here? Among them is the old blind man who apparently he is blind because the Apaches blinded him when he found the canyon.
Which, I've actually been thinking about this point of like the problem with finding an enormous cache of gold is that you either have to find the enormous cache of gold by yourself or with one other trusted associate, or you need to find the enormous cache of gold with such a large community that you can defend it. You either have to be secretive about it or you need to be able to defend it. Mm-hmm. And for much of the movie, the group is in the middle, in between. And this moment where all the bandits and the townspeople sort of come together is the one moment, other than the lone person or people, finding it by themselves. It's the only other scenario where you could conceivably, in real life, come across something like gold and actually defend that resource against the outer world. Mm-hmm. And I wish that the movie had done more with that, because I think a big part of what the movie has to offer is this idea of how the idea of gold or riches or wealth corrupts people, but also how wealth that can be exploited by someone more powerful will be exploited by someone more powerful unless you can defend it. And there's
Yeah.
sort of constantly shifting allegiances of who's going to defend it against whom, and that's what drives a lot of the plot. But it doesn't. There's no interestingly new take on it. Like, it would have been an interesting take on it if it had been like the entire town showed up to get this gold and defend it against the outside world. That would have been super interesting.
And instead we don't get that, because literally 2 scenes later, we have the cavalry is after them because they
Right.
stole the woman who's, I don't even remember her I had to look up her name because she isn't
I
really
don't think
even given a name until the end.
I thought the cavalry wasn't after them. Was the cavalry after them because of the woman? It wasn't clear if they were after them because of the woman or if they were after them because of the gold. Wasn't it that the cavalry?
So the explanation that they give for why, I think it might be voiceover. And for the record, there are multiple moments in the movie I'll be asking you, wait, did they say this? Because there are definitely moments I'm like, wait, what happened? I was not paying attention for 0.5 seconds.
Yeah,
And the cavalry, I think, is after them for the woman. Her name is Inga Bergman.
yeah,
I
classic.
love how we're going to just rip off actors and directors' names for
Yeah,
the characters. But anyway, so Inga Bergman, I think that they're chasing Colorado down for her is the reason that they're given. Well,
right,
then they're like, oh, we're gonna distract them by getting this one Indian gal drunk and then
right,
having her like run through on a horse, and that will be a distraction while the rest of us go the other direction.
right,
But it doesn't matter because like 2 scenes later, the cavalry are ambushing them,
right. And the cavalry have now figured out what it is that
that they're after the
these.
gold.
Right, exactly. So it as a ruse, it's one of the least effective in the entire movie.
And there's just, again, it's all we did was introduce a whole bunch of characters to cut them off
Right,
within
right,
15 minutes.
right,
And
right.
you see, like, it dwells for a pretty long time on like the chaos of this, literally people in a pile getting shot at, including old man Adams, who like loses his glasses and like wanders towards the screen in a
Right.
Frankenstein-esque pose because he can't see.
Right, because the cavalry ambushes them, and it's such it's almost as though they introduced all these characters and then we're like, oh shoot, we need to get rid of all these
Yes.
characters.
And so like the writer part of me understands, like, from the book, okay, I can see where like introducing these interesting cast of characters, the getting to tell these stories is like an interesting think piece and experiment in it. But wait, what do I do with them now?
Yeah.
I don't know if again, I haven't read the book, so I don't know if it's the same thing.
Minutes that you have these characters and then they're all dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just so useless. We get, okay, so now we have narrowed down our group of people we are following to Julie Newmar, Colorado, Gregory Peck. I'm calling him Colorado instead of Omar Sharif just because he's got such a cool badass name. Colorado, Gregory Peck, Inga, and the big tall Apache,
Yeah.
who isn't even the one that like got a lot of like, they kept calling one guy Monkey earlier.
Yeah.
So even the guy that you referred to the most of your like nameless Indians,
Right,
you get rid
right.
of. He was also the most problematic of them, to be fair.
Right.
So like I can see where it makes the story easier to have the one that does the least be the one that sticks around. But they do have that scene. So Gregory Peck tries to escape with the girl in the confusion. Colorado catches up to them. And
Right.
then I think this is the spot where they like knock him off the horse and the Indian like lassos him and then drags him behind the horse, which that scene is very reminiscent of when Indy is behind the truck
Yes.
holding on
Yeah.
with his whip.
And he has the whip. Yes, exactly. Yep. And
And I'm
isn't
like,
there... Yeah, go ahead.
you can see again where it's those little things where you're like, oh, that's a shot they thought was cool and went, we can do this better.
Well, and also there's a scene when Monkey tries to kill Gregory Peck when they're sort of sealed up in a think it's like a Hopi.
Yeah, it's like an Adobe thing.
And Gregory Peck fights him off with his belt, which is a whip. He's using his belt as a whip, right? So
Which
I thought, that's there it is.
also is a great setup because the girl watches him do that, and then she uses that trick later on towards the end of the movie. This is one of those rare moments in McKenna's Gold where I'm like, wow, good job, movie. You use basic screenwriting techniques.
Actually set something up properly and then resolved it at the end. Yes.
What a weird concept. I'm so proud of McKenna's Gold for that. And then we get them wandering through the desert basically for the next however long. And we should say the deal has been McKenna will help them find the treasure, providing he gets to leave with the girl. And that isn't even like the bargain he strikes. Omar Sharif is like, you want the girl? We will happily, like, you take her. You can be big hero. And which is actually a good setup for giving him a compelling reason, because McKenna is like the cold stoic who he will do the right thing regardless of the circumstances. So even if it means helping them, if it means saving the girl, he's going to do it.
Right. And I feel like in this regard, Gregory Peck is not a good comparison to Indiana Jones, because Indiana Jones has more warmth than by miles, and more humor to him as well. It's almost as though they combined Omar Sharif and McKenna to create the composition of Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones is, I think, one of the, and really Harrison Ford as an actor. I mean, that's the hard part, is really it's capturing that the ability to be dramatic when you need to be dramatic and still likable.
Yes.
Gregory Peck still comes from the era of actors where it was you were kind of a little stiff. You just had to stand there. So I recently watched The Quiet Man for an episode we're going to do on St. Patrick's Day. And in that film, I was reminded, oh, John Wayne actually has more range as an actor than most of us think.
Yeah.
But it's when we start getting towards that 60s, I think, we start getting like the Sean Connerys, actors that were more charismatic in that they weren't just macho man getting there. They were also, they had more range. They were allowed to exhibit more emotions and charm. They weren't either just the funny guy or just the stoic hero.
You know, which is funny because in real life, who's the guy who was in It's a Wonderful Life?
Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart. In real life, Jimmy Stewart volunteered for the Air Force and was a pilot, a bomber pilot, I think, during World War II, and exhibited great leadership. And yet he, of all those eras movie stars, was sort of the most likable and the most charismatic and charming. And yet it was like the roles they gave Jimmy Stewart were not the roles of the macho guy, even though in real life he did more of that than most of these movie actors.
Yeah. You know? I mean, it's definitely one of those things that most people don't know, because like Jimmy Stewart, even when after the war, he stayed in the reserves, and he actually ended up becoming like a brigadier general in the Air Force. Like he just by nature of sticking around got promoted.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. It's a good reminder that the qualities of leadership are not actually like what you're seeing in McKenna, that, you know, he's a leader, is not actually it's just one version of leadership. And the thing I like about Indiana Jones is that it is a more nuanced view of leadership than that.
Indy's a professor by day and a grave robber by night. The guy has it's a more, like, I've heard it this way, he's the American James Bond.
Yeah.
And I tend to agree, because he's more of like the academic everyman, even though like when you go down his backstory, like very few people have fathers that were Greek, whatever, scholars that traveled the globe and took you with them. It's definitely of a different era, but he still has a very like American type that he's playing.
Although that sort of father who was an expert in something in travel world, there's a lot more of those people than you would think. In the era of World War II, I remember reading a book about D-Day and the number of young men who died on Omaha Beach who had fathers in exactly that vein was shocking, right? Like it and the number of young men in the OSS and in the, it's like there were a lot of them. It was Indiana Jones is not a trope that has never occurred.
It's just one that's less common.
It's less common, but it's definitely something that happens over and over and over again, of these people who have this upbringing that is out of the ordinary, that leads them to have a sort of worldly expertise that you don't expect.
So that's what basically the entire intelligence networks, like you point out, the OSS, MI6, all of the intelligence services that came out of World War II were based on those ideas. Guys that were in the right clubs, they knew the right people, they were worldly in the fact that they had traveled well, they could speak a couple of different languages. It was very much a different culture than, you're right, it actually does fit really well within the narrative of that time, because it is the product of World War, the lost generations, like the Victorian generation, I think is the one before the lost generation, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So it's basically the Victorian generation's kids evolve into that World War II era.
Yeah.
And the lost generation is that age kind of in between.
Right. Yeah. So getting back to MacKenna's Gold, there's the weirdly scandalous scene of them all swimming in the water, and then of course the Indian woman with the scar on her face.
Okay, can I just so in IMDb trivia, just looking up the trivia, the number one trivia point is she was apparently just supposed to be like wearing I think she was supposed to be topless, but she just did completely nude. And the comment is Julie Newmar says, "No, I decided just take everything off," and no one complained or remarked about it.
Yeah. And it's the sort of thing where you're like, that is definitely 1969. Like,
definitely 1969.
Yes, 1969.
And can I just say, this is one of those moments where I'm like, Omar Sharif, you look like you are living your best life. He is swimming with a cigar in his mouth.
Yeah.
And he's like, the water is great.
Yeah, that was a lovely moment to see. Yep, I completely agree. I remember seeing that and thinking like, yep, this guy is living his best life at this moment.
All I could think was, you might be cool, but you're not as cool as Omar Sharif swimming in the middle of the desert with a cigar.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I think that was the point in the movie where I was like, for the first time, was like, wait, what year is this movie made? Because I just assumed it was like, I don't know, 59, 60, somewhere in there. And I was like, no, something is going on. This would never fly in the 50s.
This would not have flown in the 50s. And we still have voiceover that's like telling us what's going on. I think that this is the point where we're told, shortly after the whole swimming scene. Again, this is that part where there's so much in this middle where nothing really happens. It's just we see them progressing. And you get voiceover telling you about Foxy Tibbs, who is Telly Savalas, the sergeant from the cavalry.
Yeah.
And it's just Foxy Tibbs, called that because of his incredibly cleverness or something along those lines. I'm like, thank you, voiceover, for realizing that we have a character that's going to be important later that we have done nothing to introduce.
I guess we should learn about this character a little bit before we just dump him on you. Yeah.
And all we find out is like that the cavalry's following them, and that slowly it's like Tibbs and two other guys at this point that are like on their tail. And again, we're getting closer to the canyon, tensions are rising, and the cavalry is getting closer. So what does McKenna do? He convinces Omar Sharif, just all the cavalry want is the girl. So just send her to them. That will even keep them distracted if they want to try catching you, and we can continue on our way to the canyon. Omar Sharif is like, fine, leave before I change my mind. And the woman's like, well, of course, the woman and McKenna are slowly getting to know each other better. And it honestly, it's one of those moments where I'm like, I'm not certain of what the HD quality on screen was back at that time, but you can see a very clear age gap between Gregory Peck and this young woman that puts it at a slightly creepy level. You'd rather see her with Omar Sharif.
You would. And there's like a weird Stockholm syndrome type thing where, for sure, Gregory Peck's, McKenna is trying to help her and has kept her alive.
Yes, and Scarface girl, Julie Newmar, has tried murdering the girl twice.
Yeah, right. And then will strangely back off, right? Is like she has this, yeah, it's very.
And Omar Sharif is like, you hot-headed woman, go away.
And I think there's just this slightly strange, I mean, Stockholm syndrome is as close as I can get to it, where it's like there's no reason why she should see McKenna as particularly worthy of her attention at all. She should just want to get the hell away from that whole situation.
I feel like it's that thing where you're at a party, and so I, as the young person and often a group of old people, I remember there was one time I was at a thing, and there was one other girl that was like a young person there. And we kind of started talking, not because we actually were interested in each other, but because we were the only two people below the age of 50 in the same room. I feel like that's kind of the case for this girl. McKenna's the only other white person there and not trying to take advantage of her.
Right.
But he wants to send her to the cavalry. Omar Sharif says, fine. She says, but I don't want to leave you alone. And this is literally, I laughed out loud. Omar Sharif goes, he won't be alone. I am with him.
Yeah.
And so she goes, she's sent to the cavalry. Foxy Tibbs takes her in his arms and goes, we're so glad you're here. And the other two soldiers are standing there and he shoots them both. Dun-dun-dun, plot twist. Because who would ever think Telly Savalas would play a bad guy in 1969?
Right, yeah. That baldness is a dead giveaway.
Very sinister.
Yeah. So that was the point. So I was watching this movie and Cecilia was sort of wandering in and out in the evening. And that's the moment where she decided to like lean over my shoulder and actually watch. And I was thinking like, of all the times that she could watch, it's like the time that there's this like huge plot twist that just involves randomly shooting people in the head.
And then
I was like, this isn't really what this movie's about, but maybe it is what it's about.
Maybe this is. That could sum up the entire movie. Maybe this is what the movie is about. Because then the next scene, so we go from that dramatic plot twist to voiceover, Scarface girl has decided that now the other girl is gone. Obviously, McKenna will want her. And it's that, again, voiceover literally tells you that as Julie Newmar is taking two blankets and like laying them next to each other in a totally no insinuation there at all. Omar Sharif looks over and kind of like nudges McKenna. He's like, be careful.
Yeah. And then nothing happens with
that. Nothing happens.
Doesn't Foxy Tibbs shows up with the other girl?
Yes.
Yeah. So
again, story. I feel like the story keeps trying to like set up and doesn't pay off. Right. Like there's a way to do that. So one of my favorite directors right now is Rian Johnson, who Glass Onion, Knives Out, Last Jedi, Brothers Bloom, Looper. He's really good at subverting expectations.
Yeah, and I've only seen Knives Out, but I remember Knives Out as being a very tight movie where every little detail you saw.
Yes, but that's my point. He does a good job of, he knows how to set up something that then he subverts, but he gives you something else in return. In this case, the movie it always sets up and doesn't ever really pay off things. That's why when we go, good job at using the whole belt thing, we're like, wow, McKenna's Gold, you did one setup and payoff.
Right.
And then we also find out so before the girl gets like given back to the cavalry, we find out what her actual name is, which is that she's the daughter of the judge who put a price on Colorado's head. That information does nothing to the plot.
It doesn't. But I would say this whole like you're captured, you're not captured. Plot twist, you are captured again. Like maybe you're not captured. That is, we see that again and again in every Indiana Jones movie.
Yes.
Being captured, they say they're going to kill you, but they don't kill you because of what's in your head. They can't kill you because you need to be alive, and then you manage to escape, and then they manage to capture you again. Maybe you escape again, and then they capture you again.
So the Raider.net is the website that I've used to get my list of inspirations for Indiana Jones. And they make the comment, this film is kind of like what would happen if Donovan had Indiana Jones, quote unquote, captured the entire time on the way to get the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes sense, because really that's kind of what it feels like, especially since this movie, more than a lot of others, you can see where the influences on Last Crusade came from.
Right. Yeah.
And so we eventually do get this, again, very 70s 69 moment where the like way that the canyon's going to be revealed is through a psychedelics display.
Right, when everything goes rainbowy on them. Yeah.
If this was like a streaming service, it would have that caution at the beginning. People that experience seizures should be warned that there's a high light intensity and flaring in this movie.
Right.
And like the explanation is given that's like quartz or something that's like reflected off, but then the giant mountain tower thing like
becomes a gnomon for the shadow that it casts, and but like how there's no explanation for why at what point they should figure out
where's it pointing. There's no end destination. It's like given
right.
Shadows turn.
I guess the idea is like is that the very moment that because there's both the moment where they're like racing alongside the shadow is very dramatic. It's part of the trailer. It's cinematography, right? The shadow is zooming across the landscape as the light comes up. But then when the sun peaks up over the top of the thing and it's at its furthest extent, is that the point where it reveals where the cave is? Like that thing's going to cast a shadow all day long. At what point do you?
There's the thing. I don't remember if they actually set up, this is like the time and the moment, you'll know it by this.
They did not.
It's just like given. McKenna knows that after this weird psychedelic moment with the quartz, that's the moment where you know to follow the shadow. Again, shadows are all day long, depending on where the sun is. It's a giant rock in the sky. It's an obelisk.
And also the fact that it's quartz has no bearing on the plot whatsoever. Like,
no.
It's not like we're looking for the quartz thing, oh, look, there's the quartz thing. Now the light's shining through it because it's quartz. There's none of that. It's just like, we wanted to do this weird thing and now we're justifying it.
Again, so much. And that's an example of payoff without setup, which this movie also does an exceptional job of. We finally get to the canyon, though, which I will say is one of the best model miniature stuff I've seen in a while. Like they actually did put pretty good production value into designing this set, this little mini model set for it. And then they're in it. Everyone's like, oh, the gold. And McKenna's like looking around. He goes, there's something's wrong. And he's like, but what I find bothersome is his solution isn't let's go back out from the direction we came. He tells the girl, climb.
Right. Up to this, what is that? That's a famous, that cliff dwelling. It's not even there. It's not, I think
but it's that style.
It's that style of that famous cliff dwelling with the house built into the cave in the rock. But right, it makes no sense that why they would do that as opposed to go back, drift back to their horses and then try to escape that way. Also, I would like to say that the switchback trail going down.
Oh, that scene, Julie Newmar gets thrown over as she tries to kill Inga. Which that was a pretty good, like, again, for this film, this is where actually it has some really good action sets.
Yeah.
And that switchback trail was pretty intense.
It was intense, but there was no emotional repercussion for her dying, right?
Yeah, Colorado's like, oh well,
on, like it didn't even matter. It wasn't even a thing.
and we haven't
And
even fleshed out her relationship with McKenna as to why that mattered. It's like he as a marshal like took her brother to jail and got
right,
hung because he stole cattle.
right, and that's it. That's
It
all.
doesn't even explain why she put the scar on her face. Like what?
And
What is?
also, I would say, the Switchback Trail, for all that it's supposedly no one has been in this canyon for since the
It's
remains of
remarkably
the.
well maintained.
It's remarkably well maintained, and sure, it's the desert, but it's like a well maintained, churned up trail that is not sketchy in any way. It's nice switchbacks down this canyon face, which I don't know anything about the Apache, but I'm pretty sure they weren't building switchbacks down a canyon face.
It's just again so many things with this movie. We have this is actually one of the moments I genuinely enjoyed in this movie, though, is when McKenna and the girl are already climbing, and I keep calling her the girl because they don't remember her name. It's hard to remember her name too.
Her name either. Yeah, exactly.
Inga Bergman. Inga
Yeah.
Bergman. But again, doesn't matter to the story. Then while
Isn't
they're climbing,
Inga Bergman the actual name of like a real movie star?
Ingmar Bergman. Ingmar Bergman is the name of a director, and then Ingrid Bergman is the name of the gal that's in Casablanca. So again, I'm like, why did you pick that name? Was like, I don't know when the book was written. Did they even just again, so many things with this movie.
Yeah.
McKenna's Gold, you have broken my mind. They're climbing up, and this is the moment where Tibbs is like filling his saddlebags with gold. Again, Telly Savalas has gotten like maybe 15 minutes of screen time in the entire 2.5 hour long movie. And he gets killed because
the guy, is he in the Dirty Dozen?
He is. I'm pretty certain.
Yeah.
Telly Savalas also plays Blofeld in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
I remember really liking him in the Dirty Dozen. I felt like it was
He's a charismatic guy.
Charismatic guy, right? And he really kind of gets the short end of the stick in this movie.
Like again, it feels like did he owe someone a favor? Why did he like? What movie did he think he was in?
Right.
And he gets killed because the Apache warrior, who again kind of has a name, no name, he's always the quiet, tall one, and he tells Colorado, "Last night the spirits told me that I was to kill everyone who entered through the sacred valley."
Right.
And Colorado's like, "Well, that's unfortunate."
Right. And it's like, why did you wait till now?
You've had so many opportunities to kill us before.
Kill them before they were in the valley.
You've literally been the one watching us every night while we sleep.
Exactly. This does not make sense.
And he's literally he like axes Tibbs, and then it turns, and Colorado's like, "Ha! I will shoot you first." And he goes, "I took out your bullets," and like that. I don't think he does the dramatic like drop bullets thing, but I'm like, Colorado, you're a bandit. You don't know if your gun is loaded or not. Amateur hour, Omar. Amateur hour.
And also a wonderful reversal of my favorite Indiana Jones moment, where he shoots the guy who wields the big saber in Lost Ark, right? And the story behind that is Harrison Ford and a bunch of other people had food poisoning. And this was supposed to be some big sword battle, but he just wasn't feeling up to it. So he proposed to Spielberg that he just shoot the guy. And it's such a classic, like, you brought a sword to a gunfight moment. And then this is actually the reverse. It's like, you thought you brought a gun to a knife fight, but you didn't, because I took your bullets.
And as he does, that's the other part. He turns his back on.
Yeah.
He turns his back on Omar Sharif because he's like, "You don't have any bullets. You can't do anything to me." And he's pulling his hatchet, his tomahawk, out of Tibbs. And Omar Sharif is like, reaches in, "Here's my knife."
Yeah. Right. And the guy really has a pretty lame death, actually. Like,
very lame death.
Guy getting a knife in the back. you'd think he'd at least be able to say something, but no, he's out like a light.
Now, you can perhaps tell me, because here's where my attention to this movie faded so quickly. Why is he trying to kill McKenna and the girl? Like, I get the idea, I don't want to share the gold, but they aren't even taking any gold. He's like, Colorado follows them. Why would you climb up the cliff face after them?
Yeah, especially because it wasn't at all clear that the cliff face led to anywhere other than this house.
Yes.
Like, he could have just left them up there and gone about his business.
He
Yeah.
could have gotten away with the gold. That's the
Yeah.
point.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I have no answer. And also, so at this point, right, then as they climb up, they have this big fight scene
Which
reminiscent of
I will admit,
all
fight
sorts of
scene's good
The fight
because
scene is good.
I forgot. You want high dramatic tension for a fight scene, set it
Yeah.
at a cliffside.
Yes. Yes.
Instantly makes it more visceral.
Yes. And also ups the stakes. At some point in this fight scene, and I will say I liked that uh Inga Bergman helps out in the fight.
Yes, she's the one that like pulls out her belt,
right.
having seen McKenna do it before.
He also jumps on the guy's back, like the my wife and I just finished watching season 2 of Outlander last night, and there's a scene, spoiler alert to anyone, where Jamie Fraser and Claire, his wife, are trying to kill a guy, or Jamie's fighting with this guy, and Claire's just standing there, and there's a knife right next to her. It takes her like 30 seconds and like some real moments where it looked like Jamie was gonna get killed before she remembers, oh yeah, here's a knife, let me do something with it. And at least Inga Bergman didn't just stand there and be like, I can't do anything about it. She was trying, she was definitely trying, which I appreciated.
So here's where, again, do you remember how Omar Sharif dies? Because again, my attention started to wane at this point. Does he get thrown over the edge? I look in the fight.
No, they climb down. So then they start being shot at, right? They're up on the cliff edge. They're fighting,
Yes.
and they start being shot at by some Apache who are on the opposite face of the canyon.
That's why Omar Sharif climbs up, I think, is he's trying to escape the Apaches that have arrived. Isn't that it?
No, I think he's just coming after them, I think. And then they all climb down.
Yes, they fight but are interrupted by Apaches. I'm looking up now the plot summary.
It kind of doesn't actually make much sense, because if they're shooting at you,
why are you going towards them?
I guess, like, if you think, okay, there's no way down, I have to climb down, but they don't really make a big enough deal about the fact that it's really hard to climb down a cliff face, let alone in the face of multiple rifle shots from Indians who are really good shots, who are getting closer and closer to you.
And there's still no legitimate reason for them being up there. That's the thing that's driving me nuts. Like, there's nothing given. I'm looking up here to see if they say anything.
Up there, right? That would have made more sense. There's so many ways they could have set it up so that they had to be up there in order to get the gold,
Mm-hmm.
But no, but they didn't. And then somehow, I forget how Colorado died.
Colorado doesn't die. I'm looking it up now. So apparently, here's what happens. This is the Wikipedia description of the end. Colorado pursues McKenna and Inga, catching up with the ancient abandoned Native American dwelling high on the cliff. They fight but are interrupted when Apaches enter the canyon, shouting excitedly. The noise and pounding of the horses triggers a rock fall, which causes the valley floor to buckle and quake. The Apaches flee. The 3 survivors descend the cliff and frantically ride away, barely escaping the collapse of the canyon walls, which buries the gold beyond reach. And then they just part ways.
I remember. Okay, so this was the thing I wanted to say about Indiana Jones. This is the first movie that I've ever seen, besides Indiana Jones, that follows this trope of this thing that has survived millennia disintegrates and self-destructs moments after you arrive, right? Which is like the least problematic thing in Indiana Jones, which happens again and again and again. And this is the only other movie that I've ever seen where this thing happens, where it's like, this ancient treasure that has been here forever is now going to self-destruct, like, 30 minutes after you've arrived on the scene.
And if you want a better comparison for colonialism, people, I don't know what is.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Oh, geez. It's so perfect.
And
It's
it
so
is they do an amazing job destroying the place. Like in terms of, again,
right.
this is where that model, they do an incredible job of showing as it's like falling apart and the floor like raises. And
Right.
again, this looks a lot like the scene in the end of Last Crusade, where because the grail has moved, now the ground is parting and the place is starting to fall apart.
Yes, of course. Yes. Yep. Very much so. Very much so. The thing that they did not do, which I thought the Grail, so I liked Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then I watched the Grail, and I thought there was just so much more depth to it. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things I really liked about that scene in particular with the Grail is that it had that wonderful parallel of the German
Mm-hmm.
the German agent is dangling from Indiana's hand, and he's saying, "Give me your other hand. I can't hold on to you." And she's reaching out for the Grail because she thinks she can almost get it, and of course, she's being tantalized into forgetting her life because she's after this thing. And then right after she falls to her death, Indiana finds himself in the exact same parallel position with his dad, and the only reason he doesn't do the same thing because he's tempted is because his dad is able to snap him out of it and say, pay attention to what you actually have in life.
Mm-hmm.
You've got me.
Doesn't he call him Indiana too for the first time?
What's that?
Doesn't he call Sean Connery, I think, calls him Indiana instead of Junior.
Well, I think he says junior, and then he says Indiana, right? Like,
And that's the thing that like
and that gets him to like, and he says, let it go, son. And I felt like that added a level to the destruction around them.
mm-hmm.
It gave it a poignancy of not only did this person die, but you were tempted in the same way, and the only reason you didn't suffer their same fate was because of this connection to the people that you love.
Mm-hmm. Because
And
I mean that's the temptation with treasure is always like so I don't know if it's going to end up in the series or not.
there's a missed opportunity with McKenna's gold that
Yeah.
they're when it was time for them to ride away, Colorado was too eager to ride away. You should have been tempted more.
Mm-hmm. They
And
just abandon it more.
in the end, we do get the little glimpse in the end, which is very Indiana Jones-ish of McKenna's saddlebags are stuffed with gold. So we know why he was willing to ride away. But I think there should have been this. It was a missed opportunity to have Colorado have this sort of
A character
agony.
arc.
Yeah, the agony of this thing that I have, basically had everyone around me killed for. I want it so bad, and he doesn't, and that's a missed opportunity because it's very satisfying when you see that. And my dad grew up. His dad owned a movie theater
Oh,
in
cool.
small town Oregon back in the 50s and 60s, and my dad grew up helping out at the movie theater. And I was fishing with my dad a couple of years ago, and we were talking about what our favorite movies were. And he said that his favorite movie was, I think it's called Treasures of the Sierra Madre.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but he said his mind it's the best movie ever, and that it is about this, the sort of the psychology of gold fever and the
Mm-hmm.
psychology of treasure and hunting for treasure and essentially losing your mind for it. And one of my strongest critiques of McKenna's Gold is that for a movie that is entirely plot wise based around this, it does very little. It has very little of the inner psychological agony of Gold Fever for a movie that revolves entirely around it.
I 100% agree because there all you get is like people lusting for gold, but it never advances beyond that. We never get the chance to see what happens when someone does become that and they never act on it. Like in the case of Colorado.
Yeah.
He should have wanted it more to
Right.
try doing something. Like
Right.
it ends on a whimper. Oh,
Right.
and of course, McKenna and Inga kiss, which again is just a strange moment in the movie for me.
And I will say one of the other things that makes me like Colorado so much is actually, in terms of plot development, he has the most character development. He has the most character development in the sense that he and McKenna are talking at one point about what would you do with the money, and it becomes clear that what he really wants to do is go be a dandy in Paris.
Which is
And like,
amazing because I want that movie.
go ahead.
I want that movie. Omar
Oh,
Sharif as a dandy in Paris. I
Colorado.
will watch it. Colorado in Paris.
Yeah.
Wait,
But,
studios, you have an opportunity to soft reboot McKenna's Gold by casting Pedro Pascal in Colorado in Paris. And it is just him becoming a dandy in Paris while smoking.
and I think that's the power of backstory, right? Is like you care about Colorado so much more because you see this soft side to himself, this vulnerable side to himself.
That he has dimension.
Yeah.
So I was just reading Character by Robert McKee. Great book. And the whole point is that characters that have dimension are characters that have inherent contradictions.
Yeah.
And so like he uses Tony Soprano as an example of a man who has contradictions. He's someone who believes very closely in his family in both the capital F and the lowercase f sense, but also like very much xenophobic to anyone outside of that. He's caring, but also hating. And just the multiple dimensions he has with different characters.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, I'd say getting back to Indiana Jones, I'd say this is the difference between the first one and Raiders
Last one.
Well, and they continue it with the fourth one as well, and that they continue to have the character. They bring back Marion, and it turns out that Mutt is his son, right? So there's
spoiler alert for Crystal Skull.
Yeah. Came out in 2008. I don't really care about spoiling for anyone. It's on you. But the point is that these familial relationships add so much depth to Indiana Jones that even if you didn't have that wonderful early scene in Lost Ark of Indiana Jones as a young boy, the Cross of Coronado, which is a fantastic sort of throwback to McKenna's Gold in many ways, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's literally in the same place in the Southwest. It has many of the same situations happening, and it's also the backstory of Indiana Jones, which as for all of that, we have had conversations in the past about like, do you like James Bond precisely because you don't know his backstory? I'm a fan of knowing the backstory because I feel like it just gives you more to play with, right? Like when Indiana is with his dad, half the fun is just the sort of like dad, like they get into something and there's like they're too busy arguing with each other to even notice that the Nazis are who are brandishing guns at them. And, it's like it's humorous because you get so caught
the
up
floor's on fire.
You forget the larger situation that you're in, and like that is just wonderful.
Well, and I think that it's the proper use of backstory. The argument that I always have is that too many people use backstory as a weak excuse to fill character moments.
Right.
Always going back to that, well, we can reveal more about his past. Classic example of this would be the prequel films. We don't necessarily need to know every step that turns Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader. Right. We need to have just the big moments.
I found it to be very kind of deflating.
Because if you let something be an imagination, it's the iceberg theory. And this is actually something I think that is a good example of how Indiana Jones does it well, or even James Bond does it well versus the prequel films. When the iceberg theory, for those listening that aren't familiar with it, Hemingway said you let there always be more under the surface that's implied that you don't actually say. And then you let the audience come up with what is underneath. You give them enough information to guess, and it makes them more invested in the story. In the case of Darth Vader, we had decades of people going, well, how could Anakin Skywalker become this monster? And so you have all this time for people to come up with theories, which always is a bad thing to begin with, and fan fiction, and so much that existed. And while what you did is people had something to speculate about, and it made the stories more interesting. Then when you tell them what it is, and 99.9% of the time, you're not going to come up with as good an idea.
Yeah.
Because A, it isn't the story someone told themselves in their own mind. And B, it takes away the mystery of it. In the case of Indiana Jones, even though we have the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, where we see the actual like breakdown of the relationship between senior and junior, in the movie, we only basically get this is what's happening now, and you understand, oh, this is because they've had so many more fights to begin with. Starting with that Coronado thing, you get like the setting, and then they hint at it later. James Bond, they do the same thing where they tell you just enough to know.
And that's key because it keeps it relatable to everyone, right? It's like everyone has had moments when they've been like, Dad, stop being embarrassing, or, like you're missing the point, and the more you make it about a specific incident, the less universal it is for people. I wonder what would have happened with the Star Wars franchise if instead of making prequels, he just made sequels, right? Like everyone would have been totally fine to have to see what happened next, because that actually has the opposite thing going on from making a prequel, right? If you make a prequel, like the only thing you get that's good out of a prequel is maybe some big reveal of like, oh my God, that's why it happened. But like you said, the problem is that comes with the cost of you're kind of ruining a whole bunch of other stuff for people in the process of getting that payoff. Whereas with a sequel, it's more just about continuing the story, and it might not be as good. There's a reason you chose to tell this story instead of the story that happened right after this story. How could it be as good? But at least you're not ruining people's sense of things in the same way.
Timeline matters. I don't know if you've ever watched the Terminator films.
Some. I've been very hit or miss with the Terminator.
As you should be, because there's only 2 good Terminator movies, a third one that's kind of good, and then
that actually watched the good ones though. I was not systematic in that way. I don't know. I've watched what I've watched.
The past latest 2 Terminator films have their premise is, remember Terminator 2 that you really liked? We're going to go back and gut it with time travel and tell you a new story, which does nothing to advance character. Again, story and character need to be intertwined. And that's where, honestly, part of what I'm curious about the Indiana Jones series is with this 5th film, because we are getting him towards the end. The Dial of Destiny is probably like a time travel thing. So you get that temptation to what if you could change the past? Because he's old and probably has regrets by now. And so I'm going to be curious if someone asked me, how would I feel if it was a time travel thing? I'm like, I'd love it.
It's kind of perfect because that is, as you said, that is what you start to think of as you age. It's like you have less and less in front of you and more behind you. And that starts to be a major temptation in your life.
If they play it as Indy is having to struggle in a character sense of, is he going to succumb to the temptation to relive his life as a younger man again? Or, that's what the narcotic of adventure is to be able to get away from your responsibilities and put your fullness into something in a way that with abandon. It's an interesting premise to take for Indiana Jones in particular, with the cultural commentary as well. The problem is, I'm hopeful. If they tell the story right, I think it's going to be aces. There's a way to ham-fist it, as with any story.
Hey, seeing as this is the Suit Up podcast, I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Indiana Jones's style.
Yes.
Because I'm shocked that his style hasn't become more of something that people emulate.
So it is hilarious that you mentioned this, because I literally was hanging out with my family last week, and my brother made a comment. He's like, so for the folks at home, I'm currently wearing a suit. However, my normal work garb is I wear a khaki shirt, jeans, and I have the Indiana Jones leather jacket. That is my daily wardrobe. My brother looks at me, he's like, oh, so this isn't something you just do for Comic-Con. And I'm like, no. And I'm like, the reality is the only thing that changes for my Indiana Jones outfit for Comic-Con is I wear a different pair of pants. I even have the same boots.
Yeah. Yep.
Because I
Yep.
think you're absolutely right. Indiana Jones's style is like so top notch.
And
Which was your favorite like look that he has?
well, I mean, I feel like the thing that I really appreciate about it is that he goes from the 30s through, well, in Crystal Skull, it's the late 50s,
It'll
and
be the 60s in the next movie.
it'll be 60s in the next movie. And you could say, uh, um, but actually, probably a longer spread of time is he went from the 80s through 2023. Here we
Yeah.
are now. That 50, 30, 40-year period. How old am I? That 40-year period uh, is a long time for something to still continue to look classy and good. Like a lot of stuff looks dated, and it does
I
not look good.
I am so grateful to be a man for many reasons, but one of them being men's style hasn't had to like it hasn't gotten a lot of abuse by comparison to if you look at so like Peaky Blinders. I'm not sure if you've seen the show at all, but
Not to know what you're talking about in terms of style.
when it starts in the 20s, you can see the guys dress with very little difference to like how they'd be dressing in the 40s and 50s. The women, on the other hand, go from wearing these disgusting flapper dresses. If people like them, I'm happy for you, but I look at them, I'm like, that's just a sack you're wearing. To then, like, every time period, you see that their style has changed. Whereas a man's style tends to be the same with like just minor variations in how the suit is either tighter or looser or the structure of it.
Yeah. Although, right, I mean, what's interesting is that Indiana Jones's outfit continues to look cool today.
Yes.
And like the military outfits of the Germans or the Russians he's fighting, those look very dated, right? And so there's something more timeless about him. And I would also say that it's like it walks this line between white collar and blue collar,
It
right?
does.
Where it's not that
Because
he's
he's
the
wearing a
professor.
collared shirt.
Right. He's wearing a collared shirt. He's wearing khakis, but
Mm-hmm.
he's also doing some crazy shit on them, you know. And it's like important that he's wearing gloves at some point because otherwise his hands would be totally battered, right? It's like he's doing work in these clothes, and it's not like these clothes miraculously allow him to not look scruffy at some event. That's not their point, but it's more that they don't they had somehow the costume designer came up with a costume for this guy that continues to look relevant today, which is a real, you know, like what are the odds that you come up with a costume for somebody in 1984 that would still look relevant today? And you can say,
Especially
oh,
for the 80s.
right, right. And of course it helps that it was a period piece and all that, but even so, there are plenty of things he could have been wearing that would not hold up well.
So like we did with some of the guys from American Pulps, Matt and John, we talked about Secret of the Incas. And in that film, you can see they took a lot of inspiration with the fedora, bomber jacket, and even cavalry pants. But he has like this scarf. And I laughed at it. I'm like, that's so like what a pilot thing for like that time. Like, why didn't we get Indiana Jones with a scarf? I think it's actually a really good move that they didn't do that because that's one of those things that just doesn't it doesn't resonate and it doesn't stick around because like the whole wearing like the cavalry scarf or pilot scarf is such a World War One type cue.
Yeah, yeah.
I think my this is my thought on part of why it has persisted and looks still cool. Leather jackets are always cool.
Yeah.
But he is the synthesis of all that is adventure.
Yeah.
Like we had literally decades of adventure stories before Indiana Jones. And Spielberg and Lucas basically took them all in a blender, put them together, as doing the series is proving, to turn this into it. So the outfit, like even rewatching Raiders, you have just his silhouette. His silhouette itself is iconic because the hat was specifically like one that they picked that wasn't very common. Just his outline is
knew it was him. Yeah.
is him, and we recognize it. But
Yeah.
he has it's World War II. There's a very strong argument to be made. We live in a society that is post World War II more than anything. And that's the attitude that especially America has had, is everything is, we are the post World War II generation.
Yeah.
So that image and that type of appearance sticks around.
There's another, I just want to mention it before I forget, that there was another very strong illusion that I got in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're opening the Ark and he says to Marion, "Close your eyes," right? And they're like tied back to this. I think it's like one of the light posts, like one of the lamp posts. Right? They're closing their eyes, and that's what protects them from the spirit of the Ark. And it's very much like Odysseus being tied to the mast and really caught because he really wants to see the sirens, but he doesn't. He knows that he can't listen to them, and that's that I mean, it's such a strong illusion. I know I can't be the only one to have gotten that, and to tie Indiana Jones in with Odysseus is such a brilliant move, right? Of the wiliest person who gets out of things based on their wits.
And I mean, it's literally as far as the Western canon, it's the oldest adventure story. Is the Odyssey and the Iliad. Like I've been reading I've been reading a book on the Greeks' tragedy in us. It's a book on the philosophy of the Greek tragedies. And what's interesting,
plays or more,
yes, the plays. And what's interesting is realizing so many of the plays are based on the Trojan War, like the fallout of the Trojan War. It is an interesting parallel when you go, we kind of have done the same thing with World War II, where we base so much of our art and our version of life on a post-World War II world. Like Indiana Jones is a perfect example. Movie Nazis, best villains ever.
And I thought about watching Temple of Doom, and then I watched the trailer, and I was like, it's just not the same without the Nazis. Like, the Nazis were such a good foil for Indiana Jones. They really, and without them, I don't know, it feels more just sort of culturally cringe. But you can hate on the Nazis all you want, they're perfect.
No one is ever going to criticize someone for hating Nazis.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas someone might say Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is oppressing a religious group that was under colonial oppression.
It's not the same look at all. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Emmet, this has been an absolute pleasure. What are your final thoughts on MacKenna's Gold? Is it a movie you're going to rewatch?
Hell no. But I'm glad I watched it, and I'm glad that I had the impetus to rewatch the Indiana Jones movies, because they've long been favorites of mine, and I'm not one to rewatch movies very often, and I'm super glad that I did rewatch these. Thank you.
I'll put you on the spot here while we're recording. Treasure Sierra Madre is on the list of inspirations for Indiana Jones. Do you want to come back and watch your dad's favorite movie?
Sure. Yeah, we'll figure out a time.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Emmet, where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
You can hunt down my website, emmetvandriesche.com.
Emmet, thank you again for joining us on the show. This has been an absolute blast.
Yeah, thanks, Terrence.